don't aim to solve all the world's problems, but we do offer you peace of mind, hope, laughter, and ideas on how you can help improve circumstances and communities. Good change is for you. For us, we take to heart your concerns about anger, injustice, and helplessness, the pain that we each feel, and give you something better to witness, something better to believe in. In many ways, this podcast is the opposite of self-help. It's us help. We draw attention to kindness, to the better angels of our nature. We swap stories that bring smiles, deep breaths, inspiration, and ideas to help us evolve. We introduce you to people who are positively transforming lives, leaders of movements, or everyday heroes who are making change. Good change. Good change highlights the common ground we share, the unlimited positive impact of a single person, and the greater good. Welcome to Good Change, a podcast about making a world of difference. Please welcome your host and good change maker, Ken Streeter.
I'm here today with a good old friend of mine. Dagnabbit, it makes us kind of old when I think about it. We've been together for 40 years. Jib Ellison is the founder of Project RAFT. He's the founder of Blu Skye, which is a sustainability consulting company that we'll talk more about. All around international travel aficionado. He's actually coming to us today from Trancones, Mexico. And above and beneath it all, good old friend of mine. So Jib, we're glad to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here, Ken.
And you're down in Mexico with your daughter, and she's taking Spanish, and so she's got a complete immersion going on.
Yeah, exactly. When we realized she's in a school, a college that she takes one class at a time, which I think is actually a really good model for 3.5 weeks. So it's an immersive class environment. And when we realized she couldn't actually do that at school, and she was going to be sitting at home on a Zoom call, we said, well, let's just take the whole thing down to some place where everybody speaks Spanish. And we're in a little village here, and the vast majority of people, in fact, the people who work in and around us here only speak Spanish. So it's perfect.
Linda, que linda. And I can't hear it, but you've said you can hear the ocean in the background from where you're sitting.
Yeah, totally here. You can take a gander.
Oh, nice. So I don't see many of those thatched roofs in like Northern California or Central Oregon. That's unique to the tropics, I'm taking it.
Yeah, I think so. Although in the old days, I'm sure that was how they did roofs in and around at least Northern California, because they didn't have all the stuff they have here.
And sod roofs in the northern countries. So speaking of the northern countries, when you were a young buck, we spent time together down on the Kern River. You were managing that operation, and I was a river guide. And the name of the place that we stayed in was the Dump. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, you are remembering that correctly.
And how many bedrooms and how many people lived there?
It was 2 bedrooms. I think, maximum capacity, we probably had 40 people living in and out of there. And it was a time when, before most river guides had their own vehicles, much less camper vans and everything that people seem to have today. So needless to say, it was a fool's errand. It had 1 bath.
Yeah.
It was a fool's errand trying to keep it in order. So all we really could do was carve out a room for an office that kept some semblance of order, so people could come in and actually see what trips they were going to be on. And again, this is way back before the internet days, so everything was analog, handwritten, trying to figure out where people were and how they were getting there. And it was quite a logistical time.
So you had a rule there, and I can't remember what the rule was, but it was a rule about rules. And we were talking about that a couple of years ago. And it's like, don't make a rule that is easy to break. Am I remembering that right? Or
that sounds good. It wouldn't surprise me if I made a rule about rules. That would be right up my my alley.
Right. You know,
Don't create a, well, one thing for sure, don't create a rule that you're not prepared if you're the rule creator to hold.
yeah, right on.
I mean, for
Right.
sure,
And-
that makes a lot of sense.
And have you followed that almost to a T for your whole adult life?
Hence why I don't make a lot of rules.
Good thinking. Like
Yeah.
take out the trash once a week. Is that the kind of thing?
Yeah. Do the right thing.
Yeah.
Or they're vague. Actually, I do like to be quite serious, actually, and somewhat philosophical. I like directionally correct rules that require some thought and some interpretation versus take out the trash on Tuesdays at 8 a.m. That does exactly the opposite. It creates a condition in which there's no thought, but, do the right thing, which is a good rule. It's a good principle. It's more principle than a rule. Actually requires some consideration on behalf of the rule follower or the principle follower. And I think we live in a time, at least, where I live in Sonoma County, most of the time, there's so many rules. Like if you want to work on your house, I mean, there are more rules and more permits and more stuff required. Then you come down here to Mexico, and where there's very few rules. As this guy we met yesterday said, I kind of love this. He goes, well, good thing about Mexico, when you own a piece of property here, you can build lot line to lot line. You can do pretty much whatever you want. Then he said, bad news about Mexico is your neighbor can build lot line to lot line and do whatever they want. So
is a cornerstone to the idea that you like to have rules that require some thought, is that then emboldens ownership and they may take the rule more seriously?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, people want a sense of control over their lives, and that they have some, whether or not, we do have free will and all these sorts of deeper philosophical questions aside, we have the perception that we make choices. And so I think the more people are given opportunities to make those choices, the better. And the more we take away choice from people, we do so actually at the peril of communities and families and everything else, actually.
Do you see that as a primary cause of why we're struggling as much as we are on different levels, different operational or philosophical levels?
I think that's a very big question.
We've got an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, one that I'm not prepared to answer. No, I mean, I don't know. I think I know less and less as I get older and older, really. I mean, I have intuitions, and I think that probably has something to do with it. I think there's a lot of factors to the disquiet, the dis-ease of our time. And that's probably one of them, though. I think people feel less and less in control of their lives. And,
speaking of that, I'm gonna draw on an example of the dump, and dis-ease and discomfort and not feeling in control. And that maybe this is a good way for people to understand what it was like living there. So I slept generally on the top of a bus, on a luggage rack in the bus on the driveway. And one morning I woke up to, we're not going to name him, you might be able to guess who it is, but woke up to a guy mumbling and grumbling back in the alley behind the house. And I sat up and I looked, and here's this guy walking back and forth in the alley without any pants on. And I said, hey, what's going on? What's going on? He said, I can't find my pants. And so he ended up having to wear a different pair of pants. He did something to his pants and he couldn't find them. And to this day, I don't know why he had his pants off, but he couldn't find his pants. So
Yeah, there's a lot of things got lost in that shuffle. I mean, we should explain. The dump was called the dump because it was just filled with stuff and people, and like the amount of like mayonnaises and mustards in the refrigerator. I mean, there must have been 50, half-used mustards in that refrigerator at any given time, because every trip that would come off, we had a trip almost every day going out, at least one, if not two, going out, and 1 2-day trip coming back in, and again, often maybe 2 or 3 trips coming back. So it was a constant rotation of guides, people, and stuff, and it was, and we didn't have, we had Marge and Bob.
Yeah, so
Marge, kind of trying to, the only adults on in residence. I mean, we were also, I was managing probably $1 million operation, a multi-million-dollar operation. I was 19 years old or something. I was 20. Well, how old are you? You must be like 16.
No, I think I'm a little older than you, but I wasn't very much older than 20. I was, we were young and full of vim and vigor, and it was a great way to spend
a lot of
years.
Enthusiasm.
Yeah. So speaking of young, at that young age, you went to Reed College and created a project for Reed College that ended up being Project RAFT, which is an acronym for Russians and Americans for Teamwork. Tell us about how did that idea pop into your head, and what were the first 2 or 3 major things you had to do?
Yeah. Well, I was a philosophy major at Reed College, and my thesis, even though I was an undergraduate, we had to write a thesis at that place. And my thesis advisor, his specialty was nuclear deterrence theory. And little known fact, right in the height of the Cold War between the then Soviet Union and the United States, there was a doctrine of deterrence. So basically the doctrine of deterrence is, if I have a gun that's as big as your gun, you're not gonna shoot me, because I'm gonna shoot you and your somebody next to you. And so the problem with the doctrine of deterrence, from a kind of a logic and philosophical, is you always have an upper hand if you have a bigger gun or a faster gun, etc. So it led to this Cold War nuclear arms race. And this is in the early 80s, mid 80s. And the United States and the Soviet Union were just locked in this perpetual investment of billions and billions of dollars in ever more powerful bombs and more complicated bombs, and bombs that you put on submarines, bombs that you put on the back of trucks, and all in service of telling our enemies, look, don't mess with us, because we'll blast you to kingdom come. But the problem was, of course, they could do the same to us. And everyone was always worried about, the first strike. So my professor the other thing is, the people outlining these doctrines that were in the Pentagon and the equivalent in the Soviet Union were academic philosophers. Turns out, because it was so bloody complicated. So he was in this group. He was one of the more liberal characters in this small crew of academic philosophers who really leaned into this stuff. So I took a senior seminar on nuclear deterrence theory and became so terrified that everything I knew and loved could be gone in a moment's notice because of just a stupid mistake, because it was on a hair's trigger. And really, in one fell swoop, I even remember the moment, I kind of moved from being, at the time I probably was 19 or 20, maybe 21, somewhere in that range, from being kind of a self-centered river guide, kind of like young person, to an activist. of some sort. Like I needed to do something. And then I was like, okay, well, what can I do? I have no money. I have no job, so to speak. I'm a river guide. That's not like, as you know, that's not a real job. And I can't imagine like being inside and like being on phones or, you know, working in an office. So what can I do? Oh, well, I know how to do one thing really good. It's run these river trips. So maybe, and river trips have this natural quality of bringing people together. And like, you can learn about somebody in a 2-day overnight river trip that could take you years as a neighbor in a neighborhood or working together in a business. And I observed that, you know, we all have observed that as one of the unique kind of qualities. And so armed with that insight, I was like, oh, okay, well, I know how to do one thing really well. Let's organize these trips. So let's do a trip in Russia, and we'll invite Russians to come with us, and we'll put them all in the same boat. And it doesn't even matter if we speak the same language, but we need to paddle together to overcome the obstacles in front of us. It seemed like a good metaphor for the time. Generals and the politicians weren't getting a very good job done. So then, you know, armed with that insight, immediately ran into like 17 walls of like, no, that's impossible. No, that's impossible. And I went first to all the people I knew who had organized first descents, as they call them, you know, first time going to run a river in a faraway place. And said, hey, I got this idea. It's a really cool idea. What do you think? The Soviet Union is this huge place, 11 time zones. There's got to be rivers all over the place. And again, pre-internet, you had no access to information, Ken. I mean, people forget that. Like, it was just this place on a map. But there was no information about the countryside, the mountains, the rivers, the people, what was going on outside of what you could read in a newspaper, which was generally around nuclear deterrence and enemy in the Cold War.
And it was a place on a map that was behind an iron curtain, because it was still deeply a Soviet country.
Exactly. So it was hidden, you know, we just didn't know anything about it. So I went to all these, you know, people who had organized all these river trips all around the world, and they were just like, look, forget about it, kid. They were all older than me. Forget about it, kid. Basically, they said, we've been trying for years. We can't get permission. They don't give permission. They're always in, you know, all the rivers you'd want to run are in, you know, restricted areas, and you know, best to go back. But I kept thinking about it, and then it struck me. Well, here's what's different, and it's a cross appropriation move. Use a technical philosophical term. So I cross appropriated, because meaning, even though it was a river trip like the river trips they were trying to do, this was an entirely different concept. Mm-hmm. This wasn't actually about the river trip. This was about putting Russians and Americans in the same boat, mm-hmm. and building bonds of friendship at that kind of person-to-person level. So in essence, and this, you know, I know we're going to talk about Blu Skye later, but this is the move I have consistently made in my professional life, which is kind of what's called cross appropriation. So in this particular case, it's taking the paradigm, or the thing of river rafting, international river rafting, and applying it to a different whole world subculture. In this case, it was a subculture of what was called citizen diplomacy. And I didn't know anything about it until I did. But the challenge was, all these international river runners were going to the Soviet Union, and they were saying, we are Sobek, we are the international river runners, we're the best in the world, we want to come and conquer your rivers in the Soviet Union. Right. And the Soviet Union was interested in, like, how about not at all? Yeah. In Americans coming to their country to conquer their rivers. And so, of course, in retrospect, they were never going to get permission to go. In contrast, the idea that I and others, so it wasn't just me, this idea developed. I had an initial idea, and then I went to Mike Grant, and I went to Donnie Dove, and I think you were involved. There was a bunch of people that this was beer talk for a long time before it actually turned into something. But the idea had nothing to do with the first descent and Americans conquering rivers. It had all about trying to address the challenge of nuclear deterrence, bluntly, which didn't seem like it was going to work out very well.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, what can you do as just an individual? Like, I don't know. And then it was like, well, gosh, I have to guess that people in the Soviet Union love their children. I have to guess they're trying to figure out their lives and how to make a living and create meaning, and they have families, and like there's just some of these kind of common human qualities that go beyond culture and language, and certainly around politics. And how interesting that was the idea.
How interesting it was at that time, where you said you thought it was the case, but as you've mentioned earlier, it was pre-internet. It was Soviet Union. It was hidden behind layers of information that we could never access. So you really didn't know exactly what was going on over there. And you just chose to peel the layers back to try to make it work.
Yeah. Well, it was really luck. And that's the other thing, the other thread. If cross appropriation has been one thread that's run through, the things I've ended up doing, the other one, bluntly, is luck and timing. Because right about this time when we were kind of collectively thinking about this as an idea, a new leader came to power in the Soviet Union called Mikhail Gorbachev. And he started throwing around these concepts of glasnost and perestroika, and which is like, coming together and peace, mir и дружба, peace and reconciliation. And he really wanted to end the Cold War. Now, a lot of it was driven by the economics. They couldn't compete economically with the engine of the United States and in this kind of endless arms race. But for whatever reason, politically, he was reaching out to the West. And just at the same time, we were having this idea. And then I learned about this whole community of quote unquote citizen diplomacy people who were doing these teachers exchanges, lawyers exchanges, doctor exchanges. And then I found a woman who was doing youth exchanges, high school and college age students, built around climbing a mountain in the Soviet Union, Mount Elbrus. Cynthia Lazaroff was her name. And fantastic woman, brilliant woman. And she kind of took pity on me.
Was she older than you?
I called her up. I said, I got this idea and I heard about you, and you're taking kids up to, that's exactly the kind of stuff I want to do. And she was the first person. It was really interesting. She was the first person. She listened. She asked me a couple questions. She goes, I think that's a great idea. You should do it. I was like, I'd love to. I have no idea how. And she goes, well, let me talk to the people we organize our things through, and let's see what happened. It was from the sports committee. And it was her thing. And sure enough, a month or two later, she came back from the Soviet Union, and she said, I mentioned them, and they're quite interested.
Right on.
Here's the, I can't even remember the telex number, really. Here's who to communicate with. And so this was also right at the dawn of the internet. So this is literally, we had one of the early email addresses, but we primarily used this thing to receive and send telexes. at the beginning. So armed with all this like excitement and a number in the Soviet Union and in a sense a sponsor within this Cynthia Lazaroff, you know, I called Mike Grant and it was off season. It was a winter, and I said, "Hey, Mike, you know, like this thing might actually happen." He goes, "That's great." I go, "Well, you know, we need to like get an email address so we can send and receive telexes." He goes, "Okay, that's great." I said, "So where are you?" He goes, "Well, I'm at my mom's house." I'm like, "Okay, great. Well, can we, you know, you needed a phone line. Let's invest in a phone line." He's like, "Okay." So he put in a phone in his mom's closet.
Right on.
And that was the beginning. And so, you know, we would send, I'd draft something, and you can only do like, it's more like Twitter, you know, you can only draft these very short sentences. And of course, we're in English. And so, you know, we sent off this thing, no response, sent off another one, no response, sent off another one, no response. And then all of a sudden we got one response that says, you and, you know, River, what was it? It was so classic. "You and river experts from the United States invited to Katun River from this date to this date, $2,000 per person. Please remit money to this bank account in Moscow. End of telex."
Wow.
We got this thing. My colleague goes, we got a response. We got an invitation. I'm like, "Well, what does it say?" It's like, and that's all it said. And so we spent a week drafting a response of all the questions. Like, do we need to bring our own boats? Do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? How does this work? You know, blah, 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 you know, like a million questions. Like the telex cost, you know, must have cost $20, $30. It was a big, long response. Send it up. We're so excited. And then nothing. Crickets. We don't hear anything. And then days go by. Days go by.
Yeah. Days.
Yeah. So then we send it again. Crickets. Nothing. And now we're pushing into the winter, and this is supposed to be, as I recall, what was it, July, that first trip. So we're like, this is not going to be easy to organize if, you know, we don't hear anything.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden we get a response. It's like, great. Comes across on the telex. What does it say? They just hit resend the first email.
Instructions enough.
That's all he did. Yeah. So I call Cynthia and I'm like, "Cynthia, like, what do you know?" She goes, "Well, you know, things are a little bit funny in the Soviet Union, but if they're inviting you, you know, it's probably works." So, you know, we're like, "Okay, well, I guess let's proceed." So that was the very first trip, Ken, that you were part of.
Yeah.
And I was terrified. I mean, you guys may have known this because, you know, I was asking, it was for all of us, I think it was $1,500 or $2,000 plus the air ticket.
Yeah.
This is a lot of money for
river
20
guides.
something, early 20 something river guides.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people wanted to go, and which was great. And we had such a fantastic crew, but sure enough, you know, you guys all wrote your checks and we put it in the bank account. And then one day I went down to the bank, and I even remember it was a Wells Fargo. I think in El Sobrani. And I said, "Yeah, I need to transfer." It was a lot of money, $30,000, $40,000 to this bank in Moscow.
Yeah, right.
And the teller just looked at me like, "Excuse me?" I said, "Yeah, I needed, this is the, you know, routing number and everything." And so she said, "Excuse me, hold on one moment." She goes back, she gets her manager. Her manager comes over, asks me the same questions. I tell the same thing. Manager says, "Hold on." I had to go all the way up to like the branch manager. And the branch manager had to call somebody at, like, you know, like they just didn't want to do it, but they finally did, and money goes off. We just hold our breath. Like, now what?
Yeah.
Because we know we got to get an invitation to be able to get visas and everything else. So long story short, the visa, the invitation finally came. We ended up buying tickets. We rallied a bunch of equipment. We went over on Air Finland. You remember that? Fin Air?
Yeah.
And it was an amazing, amazing expedition that really, set the stage for the rest of my life. Because out of that, we realized that we had all the premise that we had about people-to-people exchange, that you could really, if you can connect at that level, it all kind of, all the stuff, all the stories, all the conflicts, they just kind of go away. And it turned out that they were as eager to connect with us as we were with them in that very personal way.
Yeah. So Jib, I got to tell you, as you just explained that about the connection, I actually took a deep breath and it made me relax. It was a phenomenal experience for me just now to recognize the power of that connection.
Yeah, I completely, and I really see it's the same in our, to kind of put this forward to our current divide in the United States politically and seemingly culturally and socially. I mean, I do a lot of work in the Midwest with Trump supporters, bluntly, they're Trump supporters. I am not. And yet, at the level of, do you love your children? Do you need meaning and strive for meaning and some sense of like that you have some control over your life, as I do? Yes. Basically, the people I interact with, they're good people. Like really good people. And so, I do feel like that is part of the solution, is somehow the stereotypes, the stories we're telling ourselves about each other, they melt when you actually have an opportunity to just talk to somebody. This is a person to person.
It's the story that we're telling each other, and it's the story that to some degree we're being told. And my example of that from that first trip in Siberia was walking into the town, and I may butcher the way this is said, but Madalavoycheskoye, which the translation was reindeer hunting village. And I remember the locals.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good there.
Хорошо. So the locals literally ran and hid in their cabins. They saw us coming and they ran and hid in their cabins. And then a few minutes later, after, 5-10 minutes, a couple of the older gentlemen, the elders, the brave community gatekeepers walked out and through the translator said, they understood then that we were barbarians and we came by river and we weren't aliens invading from some planet because of all the fancy river gear and the video cameras that looked like weapons, could have. But one of the older gentlemen said, you're not the barbarians we were told you were. And that's a perfect example of what you're talking about. Exactly.
So, so it was a profound experience, I think, for all of us. But speaking for myself, in that this kind of crazy idea that connected two worlds, right? It connected the world of rafting, which I was well steeped in, but I'd observed certain qualities to these commercial trips that translated perfectly into a different world of, in this case, citizen diplomacy. And when that was bridged, it just set in motion. It was, the joke was we have a tiger by the tail, because the Soviet Union was politically, opening up very, very fast, but it was still a very closed place. And so over the next, I don't know, 5, 6 years. We spent a lot of time there. We did a lot of different programs and river trips. We did youth exchanges. We did what we called citizen exchanges. We did, I'll do that again. Hold on one second. So it doesn't make this clunk. So over 5 or 6 years, we ended up doing youth exchanges. We did citizen exchanges. We did competitions, which were really, they were called rallies, built around these events that would happen all over the Soviet Union. And what really kind of made the whole glue work was not only the citizen diplomacy component, but the fact that the Soviet Union had this whole group of river runners who were non-commercial, who had been developing techniques and designing boats and doing first descents and in complete isolation from the rest of the world. Like, they had no idea anybody else outside of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc was running rivers for fun, and vice versa. We had no idea that there was anybody in the Soviet Union who was doing these things. And so there was this bond among guides that really gave so much energy to this whole concept. So they developed their own organization. And again, it fit the politics of the time really well. And so there was lots of press, and we became kind of a poster child for the whole glasnost and perestroika movement. So what one learned in this is that the Margaret Mead quote actually does hold with an addendum. So the quote is, "Never doubt that a small group of committed people can make a difference."
Right.
The addendum is, when the time is right.
Yeah.
And
Was there a time then, with that quote in mind and all of these experiences under your belt, so to speak, was there a time where you thought to yourself, oh my goodness, I think we're maybe making a difference here?
Not really till later. I mean, it was so intense, being a young man with no experience in running an organization, much less an international organization, with all the complexities of that, and being gone out in the middle of nowhere for so long. There was just so many logistics, and just holding the tiger by the tail. There wasn't a lot of reflection, bluntly, on, are we really making a difference? And, arguably we didn't. I mean, we were a tiny organization, relatively speaking, in a part which played a very small part of a very large transformation, which ultimately led to the Soviet Union becoming Russia, breaking up, and the nuclear threat minimizing. Never really has gone away, and many people actually feel today it's as bad as it was. I don't know if that's true, but for a moment there, it felt like my whole young life, which had this existential threat of nuclear war, was lowered. And now we have an existential threat of environmental collapse and the social upheaval that would come with that, which is now my new project.
Yeah. So before shifting onto that,
yeah.
And speaking of the tiger by the tail, or maybe having a lot of balls in the air, I see that you're still grabbing tigers by the tail. But you said something a couple of minutes ago that you played a Project RAFT may have played a very small role in a big movement. And my thought when you said that was, isn't that kind of how they almost all work, where we all have to do something small to medium, maybe periodically to large, in order to create gigantic change.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair observation. And I think focusing on what you have a way to contribute, where you have some passion and expertise. I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I am not, I think I am an activist, objectively, in many areas, but I'm not I guess I'm a selfish activist in that I try and look with as much objectivity as possible at what I can do, mm-hmm. and what I'm good at and what I like to do. Mm-hmm. And I try and take those, skills, qualities, areas of passion and interest, and apply them to activism, versus just, as my original dilemma with the Russia thing. Like, I got to do something. I can't imagine going and working for a nuclear-free nonprofit at that time, mm-hmm. On phone calls, cold calling people. That just wouldn't have, I don't think I would have lasted very long. Mm-hmm. So
in that regard, I think that's an important tip for folks. And you called it selfish activism. But if you're not empowered by it, if you're not inspired by it, if it's not something that you have control over to some degree, if it's not something you can do, you're not going to be as forceful, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's musicians who are skilled. I mean, it's kind of like, what are you good at, or could you be really good at, and can you take that thing and again, cross appropriate, bring it over and apply it to a different area that perhaps is not normally doesn't normally see those skills. So
I think a lot of times people feel that it's too big, that the problem that they want to tackle is too big, and what difference will they make? And your story of Project RAFT, of a 20-something-year-old kid taking action based on what you understood and what you felt like you could use to chip away at a big problem by being a small role player in that big problem. When you break it down like that, when you chunk it out, I think that's another way for people to feel more hope about and potential power about something that they can do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, if you like to make music, if you're good at numbers, if you're passionate about video games, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
You can, I'm confident with a little creativity, there's a way to apply that thing. And then it does have you'll sustain. Like, mm-hmm. I loved, and still do, I love running rivers. Rivers are they're just part of me. In fact, I'm planning some trips, assuming things open up. I want to go to Alaska and run the Tatanchini this summer. And I just love it. Always have, since the first time I went. And so the idea of being able, and then I love traveling and I love exploring. And when I was younger, I loved the kind of first descent, and so everything about that Project RAFT was just right in my passion zone. So of course one will endure, mm-hmm. but what gave it meaning beyond simply just doing, something fun and adventurous and whatnot, was this other piece. And so through the whole Project RAFT thing, I became really experientially wrapped up in wow, yeah, we can make, what I said earlier, we can make a difference. That's fascinating, because and you can be part of bigger movements. and you can contribute in your own unique way. If you're creative, you have to be creative. I mean, that is the hardest part. Is it's not, if some, I always thought like, this is such an obvious idea. So when we first had the idea to do the citizen diplomacy side of this, I was like, this is such an obvious idea. Somebody must be doing it. And nobody even considered it.
Yeah.
It was shocking to me.
Yeah.
So, so it does take some creative juices, but start with what you love.
Yeah.
And this reminds me of a story. I took a seminar somewhere in all of this when I was in my 20s. And it was 3 days with like this, I called him the smartest man in the world. He had like 4 PhDs in like biology, physics, psychology, and philosophy. And he was talking, and he basically talked for 3 days, nonstop. And he was weaving, all of history, the philosophy of science. And it was all about kind of what we call today sustainability, and how human beings live in harmony with nature. And it went on and on. You'd fall asleep for a half an hour at a time and wake back up, and he'd just be on basically saying the same thing that he was saying before. And it was hilarious, actually. I think of it in retrospect, like 3 solid days. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
So it gets to the conclusion. It's day 3, and we're in like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We've been going since 8 a.m. and it's been 3 solid days of this guy talking. And he goes, so to conclude, in summary, he looks up and he goes, do what you love.
Oh my God.
That was it. He said, if you want to make a difference in the world, do what you love. Because if you do it from a martyr place, you're going to just recreate the same bullshit that we've been going through as human beings. So it was like, couldn't you kind of cut to the chase in about 45 minutes with a few slides?
Yeah, before day one's lunch, at least. So here's my question about that. And, you've talked about this victim and responsible mindset, and basically, if you're doing what you love and you're doing it something well enough, is it possible to come at that and still have a victim's mentality?
Good question. I think so. Sure. I think because if you think about a victim versus a victim mindset, so making a distinction between being a victim, in other words, having something really bad external come at you and victimize you, from a victim mindset, which is really a story. It's a story we tell ourselves about either that incident, which is a very easy story that you will get a lot of probably agreement for, but you can also have it about big categories, government, men, women, big business, the Soviet Union, the United States. It goes on and on and on, whereby it is a group or an individual out there that is doing something to you that you have no control over. And the emotions associated with that are generally, disempowerment, anger, upset, betrayal, a lot of things that, in a sense, we would associate depression with not such good emotions, right?
Yeah.
And in contrast, a responsible mindset as one where I actually am in control, I actually do make a difference. It tends to have emotions associated with it, much more empowering. Like, I'm in control. I feel empowered. I feel like I can, move forward. I feel, good. I feel excited. I feel, et cetera, et cetera. And then, the question is where, in which set of emotions are you most likely to be effective? And generally speaking, in the more responsible side of things. So both of them are stories. Neither of them are true. Mm-hmm. What happens. Again, this is, as I get older and older, I just really do see, what happens. And a lot of it is unpleasant and a lot of it is pleasant in the moment and for some time afterward. But the story we put on it really is our choice.
Yeah.
And depending on the story will directly relate to how one comports oneself in the world.
Yeah. There's a saying about George Gerbner, who was a media expert in the 50s and 60s, I think, said he who tells the story or he who shares the narrative controls a culture or makes or defines a culture. And you can say that about your own life and about whether or not you're choosing to participate in a way that can help manifest good change.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about the next stage in your life. So how about if we take a break here for a minute and then come back and we'll talk about Blu Skye and sustainability and all the different things that you're working on now.
With every show, we ask our guests to share a video of them doing something fun. One of their favorite songs, a few lines from a book they enjoyed, or a scene from a great movie. Something that matches their hopes, dreams, and good work. And then we give this to you. Because laughter and beauty soothes, heals, and changes us. You can find and unwrap this gift on any of our social media sites. Thank you for participating in this podcast. Until next time, keep an eye out for change, good change, and join our movement at kenstreeter.com.